Welcome back. We're talking to Michael Ventura about westerns today, and I assume with his vast knowledge of film, he'll start us out in the origins of westerns, and why don't you take it from there, Michael?
Okay, with my vast knowledge. Uh, well, really, and I've mentioned this film before, the first big hit movie in the United States was 13 minutes long. Came out in 1903, and it was called The Great Train Robbery, and it was a Western. It was shot in New Jersey, but it was a Western. Uh, an outlaw gang robs a train, and in brief, it's an outlaw gang robs a train. They kill a couple of people. There is a pretty convincing special effect. The camera is on the train, moving forward, and if you look close, you can see it's a dummy. But they wouldn't have been looking close in 1903. They're just looking at this thing that they'd never seen before, and the guy is beating up the dummy and throws him off the train, and it's very violent. There's an innocent guy who gets killed. There's finally, the good guys track down the outlaws, and there's a big gunfight, and they're all killed. And people would cheer and cheer and cheer when this happened. You got to remember, these people had never seen a movie that went longer than a minute and a half or something. And at the very end, there's a head and shoulders shot of a cowboy, and he pulls a gun and he shoots the audience. And as I've told you before, in that shot, there were people in the audience who shot back. And there are enough stories of that I believe it. There are people in the audience who took that personally. They shot back. And some prints have the guy shooting at the beginning and the end. The original, it was at the end. So that film, it began the film industry, not cinema per se, but the film industry in the United States. And in the silent era, there was William S. Hart, who made kind of serious westerns, and Tom Mix, who made Tom Mix westerns. And they were commercially successful. They weren't big films. William S. Hart was trying to be realistic. And if you see his films, his cowboys look like cowboys. Remember, it's the 19-teens and the 1920s, and into the 30s and 40s and 50s. There are a lot of people alive who knew the West in the late 19th century, or who knew people who knew it. My brother Davey and I were driving from, this is 1980, spring of 1980. We drove from, no, I'm wrong again, it's the spring of the fall of 1979. We drove from Austin. We were going to Lubbock. We gave a lift to some friend of mine, and to see her grandmother in Sweetwater. And it became very clear that her grandmother was an old-fashioned, very Christian lady, about 80 years old in 1979, born right at the turn of that century. And I slipped a note to my brother Davey with "Don't curse, nothing, don't curse." That would have thrown us right out of there. She was complaining about how dirty the Red Skelton show was. So you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so she's hosting us, making us the iced tea and that kind of thing, and tells us about how her father gave twice hired as a ranch hand William Bonney, Billy the Kid. And I'm talking to a person who talked to a person who talked to Billy the Kid. And so it is that long ago, and at the same time, it's not that long ago. The beautiful silent film, and I mean it in scenery. It's lucky it's silent because it's pretty corny. But if you're watching for the photography by the cinematographer Carl Brown, the covered wagon, which was something like 1923, something like that, and they wanted to do a movie of covered wagons, those big Conestoga wagons. Well, it was expensive to build a lot of covered wagons, and they called out across the West if people who had Conestoga wagons that their parents or they themselves had come west in, if they would bring them to where the film was going to be shot, which was in California, because you could find some high plains if you look, and with some mountains on the Oregon Trail that were, let me get this straight. No, they were shooting on the Oregon Trail, so it was come to this spot and we'll pay you this much money and you'll live in tents and you'll be fed and give you drive your wagons to this picture. And they got a lot of people who had the original Conestoga wagons, and they drove the wagons that their parents or grandparents had driven. And a detail I like very much about this film is that they were trying to get all kinds of newfangled ways to get the wagons down from the cliffs and then cross the river, and they had no choice but to do it the way the first people had done it. They lost some wagons on the way the first people did. Nobody got killed. But the West was fresh. Wyatt Earp died in 1929, and he spent his last years with his wife Josephine in Los Angeles. He was a great favorite of the Hollywood people. He didn't make a film, but apparently he was very tall for his generation, 6'1". He was still ramrod straight. You could believe everything they said about him. And he knew the movie people. They gave him a great funeral. He knew John Ford, for instance, and Howard Hawks, people who later, very soon, made Westerns. And then, but the genre was all pretty funky, what they used to call odors, and they were made on the east side of the Sierras, Lone Pine, those kind of places. They were half-hour, 40-minute, 50-minute movies. John Wayne starred in a lot of them, but he mainly thought of himself as a stuntman. And so he's very surprised when John Ford, who already had a brilliant career as a director, had won Academy Awards, was one of the more respected directors in Hollywood. John Ford asked John Wayne, "Do you want to star in a picture I'm making?" And Wayne, if you look at the movie Stagecoach, 1939, Wayne was still quite young looking, very fresh-faced. And Wayne, the story goes, said, "Are you sure you want me?" Because he didn't think he was much of an actor. That wasn't what he really did. He rode horses. And he said, yeah, I want you. And they made Stagecoach with a wonderful cast and a gripping story, and the Indians are the bad guys, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the white people are the bad guys too. Classic, hokey, but beautifully shot and gripping, because all the parts are played to a T. And the film made John Wayne a star, and he never stopped being one. And this was a film that was considered an adult Western at the time. Westerns had basically been fodder for younger people in the movies. They weren't movies taken seriously. One or two, like Covered Wagon, like Cimarron, early in the 30s. But this was a Western so elegantly done, you had to take it seriously. And, in fact, when, to show how well it was done, to talk about how well it was done, when they asked Orson Welles years later who were his influences before
No, no, no.
Okay. If I had one of those old-timey uh, theaters that we used to go to see, at programs of old movies, I'd do a double feature of Stagecoach and Citizen Kane, because you can do that at home now. If you watch Stagecoach and then you watch Citizen Kane, all the shots in Citizen Kane are in Stagecoach.
Huh.
All the angles, all the use of ceilings, the low shot looking up, how you're aware of the ceiling in a home, the contrasts. You watch the cinematography and mise en scene of Stagecoach, and then you watch Citizen Kane right afterwards, and you go, oh, Wells was right. That's where he learned it. I mean, he put his own twist on it. I'm not taking away from his achievement at all, but he knew who he should learn it from. So when I was a kid, it was the 1950s, and so we shift away from history now. It was the 1950s, and I'm going to the movies, as I said, and there are Saturday double features for kids. You go at about 10 in the morning, and you're there about 4 in the afternoon, and it's a Western or war movie, maybe 2 Westerns, 10 cartoons in a row, and then between other films, 10 more cartoons in a row. A newsreel showing an atomic bomb blast, I'm not kidding. So you watched Westerns, and we didn't know from even the movie stars. He had John Wayne, but they were very familiar to us. Randolph Scott, Gary Cooper, and the Western form was sort of emblazoned into our heads. And I noticed things then. I mean, I was just a kid, but getting to be 10 in 1955, 11, 12, 13. So, and I noticed all these Western heroes, Randolph Scott in the Bud Bottacher movies, which are very different from John Ford's or Howard Hawks' Westerns. In the Bud Bottacher movies with Randolph Scott, Scott is almost an anti-hero. He's clearly playing a troubled man with a past, a man whose problems you don't want to know about, who's seen things you don't want to see. And the Tall T, Buchanan Rides Alone, 7 Men from Now, which is my favorite, I think. They're not big productions. Excellent character actors, more psychologically complex than the John Ford Westerns or the Howard Hawks Westerns, most of them. And very well acted on all the parts. You'll see early Lee Marvin playing a complicated bad guy who's, he's a bad guy, but he is a full character. He's not just a bad guy. Most of the Bud Bottacher villains are like that. But what Randolph Scott had in common with John Wayne, and what they had in common with Gary Cooper, who was 52 or 51 when he made High Noon in 1952, and he looked it. This was not a young guy. This was not a guy trying to be glamorous. He looked like what he was playing, a tired old sheriff who is being forced to do something he may not be able to do. He may not be able to stop these guys. He's all alone. The town won't have anything to do with it because they're scared of these guys. There's just 3 or 4 guys coming in, and Clint Eastwood can handle that. But these guys were not superheroes. John Wayne and Randolph Scott, Gary Cooper, and the other Western actors of that time, Glenn Ford, they didn't play people who could do remarkable things. They played, John Wayne wasn't the fastest on the draw. Neither was Randolph Scott. They played people who, men who were kind of tired. They were all kind of tired.
Yeah.
And who were going to face up to this thing. What they had in common wasn't a superpower. It was integrity.
Yeah.
They had their own integrity about their own way of life.
Yeah.
There were things they would do.
Let me stop you here real quick. Sorry. The era that we're talking about, so I assume we're talking about like Rio Bravo, Sons of Liberty Valance, High Noon.
Yep.
So we're talking about what, like 48 to 55 or something, maybe?
More like 48, 47 to 62.
Okay. All right.
That era.
When does Rio Bravo come out? 57 or
59?
59. Okay.
In which Rick Nelson,
Right.
does the fastest draw I ever saw. I went back to that movie a couple of times and said, did he really do that? He really does a fast draw. Anyway.
And Rick Nelson's in
Rio Bravo.
Right, but he's in what's the one, I think it's with Randolph Scott, where is it Rick Nelson and his father, and he ends up being at Red River? Is that the
Red River? That was Montgomery Clift.
Okay.
Montgomery Clift and John Wayne, and the kid was too young to be Rick Nelson. Red River was a great film.
Yeah.
Late 1940s.
Oh, really? Okay. Huh. Yeah. All right.
But these guys, even like John Wayne in The Searchers, where he plays the kind of guy who's crazy.
Yeah.
He wants to go revenge. He wants to kill people. And at the end of it, he ends up not as crazy. But he still won't go into the nice normal house at the end. He walks away. So some of these people were complex, but what they had in common was they lived by their code. Some of it you might not approve of, some of it you might, but they weren't going to change that. They were ready to die for it. I noticed when I was a kid that, the gunfighter, the star, whatever you want to call him, comes into a bar. And classic scene that happens in almost all these pictures. And everybody else notices him. And whatever little action is going to be, when he goes to the bar, he gets a drink. But I'm thinking as I'm watching, he's no different from these guys. They're not all respecting him because he wears a gun. They all wear a gun. The gun isn't what's impressive about him. What's impressive about him is he has the air of someone who knows his own mind. He has the air of someone with a purpose. I couldn't have said all this when I was a kid, but I sensed it. I looked at it. He doesn't get his authority from the gun. He gets his authority from who he is. Well, all these other guys, they all kind of, the good guys and the bad guys, they all kind of hang together. Alone, not one of them is all that much. But this guy prefers alone. And that's very strange. People don't get that. And he gets his aura, his vibe of authority from the fact that he walks in there alone, a stranger, and he doesn't need to make friends. He's not that interested in making friends. In fact, he's not interested at all. He's there for a reason. He's going to figure out what that reason is and follow it to the end. And that's what gives him the air. And maybe he has a reputation. Maybe like John Wesley Hardin, who was an actual guy, he's been in 40 gunfights and won them all. But that was rare. There weren't too many John Wesley Hardins around. So he comes in, as I started to say, human. He doesn't do anything you couldn't do maybe on your best day. The Private Eyes had that in common too. We talked about noir. Bogart and Mitchum and those guys, they weren't doing anything you couldn't possibly do. They had that code, and that's what stayed constant, even in the westerns that followed. the heroes, they were heroes because they lived by a code of what they do, what they wouldn't do, of what they were in the world for. Until John Wayne dies in The Shootist, his last film. There he's playing a man in his 50s or 60s, and he's a gunfighter, and he wants to challenge the gunfighters around so he can get killed quickly instead of the slow way of the cancer that's killing him. They don't lose that sense of personhood, kind of an awkward word, that is the one thing they all share in all those Westerns. And it's as though, when Walt Whitman said of the open road, there a great personal deed has room. It's as though to show this human kind of figure in the amazing backdrop that is the Western United States. Whether it's Monument Valley or the High Plains or the Sierras, the amazing variety of topography that is the Western United States. And through that is this spirit, this samurai, if you like, and I think that figure was the lifeblood of the Western until Clint Eastwood comes along with Sergio Leone in the early 60s with The Man with No Name. Now that's spooky right there. The Man with No Name. And he is playing a person who is ghostly. In fact, in one of my favorite films, Clint Eastwood directed, High Plains Drifter, he plays a ghost, as you find out at the end of the film. But he plays a person who gets a lot of help with his fast draw from the editing department.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real fast draw. And way faster than anybody else. And nobody can take him. They can fool him like a fistful of dollars. They can beat him up. They can run him out of town. Why they don't kill him, I don't know. But they run him out of town. And he's going to come back. Yeah. But he won't be run out of town.
Well, let me
yeah.
As we transition from into the spaghetti Western and the Clint Eastwood character, those characters, Gary Cooper and High Noon, and the characters that John Wayne plays through a slew of movies, and then and the other guys that aren't coming to mind right now, even Dean Martin, all of those guys, there's like a hidden wound that's like supplicating under where you can't see it, and there's something that they're overcoming all the time, some kind of emotion or emotional wound or something in their past that they're constantly overcoming, and especially in High Noon, it's never specified really what Gary Cooper's past. They never really describe it succinctly, but there's this contrast between Grace Kelly and his ex-girlfriend, right? And you get this idea that maybe he was a little wilder before, or he has something that he regrets in his past, or possibly he was the type of man that he repented from being, or that he was trying to be a better man. Just from the who was it, Dolores Del Rio, or who's the
tip of my tongue.
Yeah, but you get that idea that
Wonderful Mexican actress.
yeah, that he's not just waiting. Those guys kind of, the guys coming in on the train kind of represent something from his past, or a person that he used to be, right? And it seems like that there's something that they're all of those guys kind of share, is like some amorphous thing in their past, or something that they're trying to ignore or overcome, or really it's almost like you see that in John Wayne. You see this kind of cringing in his face, especially in Rio Bravo, where it's almost like he has like a wound, a real wound under his shirt or something like that he's constantly like trying to make it through and be a man and be upright and stout, despite of that, right? And the way that's contrasted in Rio Bravo with the Dean Martin character, who is just totally engulfed in that wound, and is trying to overcome it in his own way, in like an external way, and John Wayne is kind of doing it in a more like Zen way, or and trying to carry up and bring up Dean Martin with him as he does that. But it seems like something that they all kind of share. Even
I admire what you called it, a hidden wound.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Randolph Scott and John Wayne especially, and Gary Cooper and I knew a hidden wound that makes them, they're always going to leave town. Makes them not stay.
yeah,
Like these are not, for whatever reason, and you're right, it's never stated, these are not people who settle down. These are not people who are comfortable with normal life. It's like at the end of the Magnificent Seven, the farmers wanted them to come, but now the farmers want them to go.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They've done their work, and the old man says, the farmers win. The farmers always win.
Yeah, it's almost like
It's
the dangerous men that Orwell talks about, the dangerous men that protect society, that they're not a part of that domestic life, like they can't do that family settle down life, but they have to be who they are to protect that life for other people in a way.
yes, the samurai.
Yeah,
Kind of thing. They didn't become samurai to settle down and raise a family.
yeah,
And it's interesting. It's always interested me how well the Western mythos of the American Westerns zigzag into the ethos of the samurai in Japan and of the warrior in China. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I love that picture, and to me, it's a Western.
yeah,
And these two people, there's a woman warrior as well, and it's right there for them if they wanted it to get together, and they just can't.
yeah.
The crouching tigers are inside them. No, it's very true what you say.
So, but moving into that Clint Eastwood era, and his character doesn't have that hidden wound. His character is there is no, you don't think of him as having some past that he's dealing with, or something that he's getting over. He's like, he pretty much has the same attitude as James Bond.
Exactly, and came out around the same time.
Right, and you could call that a kind of psychopathic personality. I think you could. You know, I mean, you could
Yes,
look at
I think you could.
the Man with No Name as a psychopath. I mean, he doesn't have any. He always gets in those situations where he could feel sentimental about a woman or a family or something like that, but he doesn't at all, and just it's all very cut and dry. And and it's interesting when you think about the Wild Bunch and how that kind of that was kind of like a swan song for those John Wayne, Gary Cooper
Yep. Yep.
characters in a way,
Mm-hmm.
as those spaghetti western characters came along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Wild Bunch. Uh, One thing, it's early 20th century. You know, it's the Mexican Revolution, and there's no place for them in the United States anymore. They try to do something and they get surprised and they get massacred and they get chased, and they go down into a country they don't understand, and one thing and another, and they go to get themselves massacred. It's just an amazing scene. I mean, the way they walk down that street, the four of them. William Holden and Warren Oates and I can't remember the other guy. L.Q. Jones? No. Ben Johnson, isn't it? Is it Ben Johnson?
Yeah, it's Ben. Yeah. It is Ben Johnson. Ernest Borgnine, yeah.
And quite believably, actually, they take on a whole army. and they're when let's go get them, meaning get the guy in their bunch who the general has. The answer is why not? And you see in that picture, in several places, the answer is why not? That's why Big Boy Mendon called his column in the Austin Sun, why not? So their reason for being has become why not? And they're not really heroes, but then they go down like heroes. It is a strange and wonderful film. Now, in Eastwood, when he starts directing his own films, The Outlaw Josie Wales, he's his wound is not hidden. He wants revenge, period. But he gets a little sentimental about the young woman. At the same time, you don't have a sense he's going to stay. And then finally, Unforgiven, which was his. It's hard to believe that film was 1992. 1992 was a long time ago. But his farewell to the Western as a form. And there he was, a cold stone killer. And met a woman. The background of the story, the woman, he decided to be a good guy for the woman. Had 2 kids. And goes on one last job. The woman's dead, she's died. And he goes on that job with Morgan Freeman. And he survives. The scroll at the end, he becomes a shopkeeper somewhere. But even in that, the wound is not hidden. And there is no explanation. And this is true of all these guys. There is no explanation about why they are, how they are. And yet, this is the ultimate American cinematic form. You can't think of American cinema without thinking of the Western. Where at the heart of it is screenwriters, the sheriffs, the outlaws, whichever guys they may be taking. Sam Peckinpah's great earlier film, Ride the High Country, with Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea. Two ex-lawmen, one's being an attorney and being a sharpshooter. The other is a little over the hill. He needs glasses to read the contract. Who are going to get this payroll and I forget what the subplot is there, but they seem almost peaceful, almost happy. But when push comes to shove, they're who they've always been. And as a great stuntman, Yakima Canute, as he said of Tom Mix, actually, the guy who played the cowboy, he'd fight for the hell of it. He'd fight for fun, money, or old clothes. And these people have something of that themselves. And then you get a film, and this film's 30 years old too, almost. Tombstone, you know that film?
Yeah.
Where, when I first saw it, I dug it, and Val Kilmer playing Doc Holliday was great. I didn't think it had made an impression on me, but I don't know how many times I've seen it since. It definitely made an impression on me. And then Wyatt Earp films become kind of a genre of their own. But it ended differently. It ended with Robert Mitchum narrating his last film role, with his voice in that film, with what actually did happen. Now Josephine Earp, the woman he married, he met her in Tombstone, and she was not rich, as the movie says, but they married, and they stayed together until his death in 1929. They went from mining town to mining town, gold rush town to gold rush town, setting up brothels, setting up bars, setting up post offices, mining the miners. When they finally got to Los Angeles, they got a little place out in Vidal in the desert near 29 Palms, near 100 miles east of 29 Palms, but through that desert. And they had 2 or 3 little mines that they'd go up and that they owned and that they mined. Bat Masterson became a sports writer in New York City. He sat at his desk the last night of his life. The last sentence he wrote that was in his typewriter was, how did it go? It was, Providence has decreed that the rich and the poor are allowed the same amount of ice, but the rich get theirs in summer. And pretty good sentence to go out on. And just I was talking about Earp. So he did the stuff they said he did. There are witnesses. There's all kinds of accounts. When he was the scene in Tombstone, you also see it in the Kevin Costner, Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
Kind of ponderous, but I like the film. Where they're after the gang that killed Earp's brother and ambushed Earp's brother, and the gang ambushes them, and the bullets are coming from all sides, and Earp and Doc Holliday and the 2 guys, Curly Curry, I think his name was, and the other guy, are pinned down, and Earp gets up and 2 guns, stands up, walks right into the middle of it, The bullets tore his clothing, but he wasn't hit. In all the fights he was in his whole life, he wasn't hit. Not wounded once, not grazed. There are plenty of witnesses and eyewitness accounts. Everybody disliked Doc Holliday, just like that movie said, except Earp. And Josephine Earp later said, because she lived into the 1930s, that when they visited Doc Holliday when he was dying, Earp said, "So strange you dying first," to the effect, this is the exact quote, "You saved my life, I wouldn't be here without you. So strange you're dying first." And Earp was loyal to him, no matter what other people thought of him. Bat Masterson hated him, Earp's brother hated Doc Holliday. So it's interesting that, to me, that some of these men, the ones we know more about who lived to tell the tale, finally, Earp had he settled down with Josephine in that sense, but they never settled down. The only house they ever owned was this little house in Vidal, California, in the desert that's still there. And so how do I want to round this up? Let's see. What's your favorite Western?
Oh, probably High Noon.
I think my favorite Western, if you woke me up at 3 in the morning and said, your favorite Western, I go, Rio Bravo.
Yeah. Those, like, Sons of Katie Elder and Rio Bravo and The Searchers are kind of in one kind of trinity, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're by 3 different directors. Now, that's very interesting.
Is that right?
Yeah, because
right.
Searchers is John Ford.
Yep.
And Rio Bravo is Howard Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Henry Hathaway or somebody like that did The Sons of Katie Elder. And yet the 3 of those go together. They really do. They are, yeah. And when I see them now, I can see all kinds of things that are, to put it mildly, unwoke about them. And at the same time, I wouldn't have them any other way. That may be a terrible thing to say in this day and age. But the good ones, the really good ones, are perfect as they stand. They really are what they are, and they exude what every frame lets you know what these people really believe and how they, in the sense of how they behave. All their belief is in their behavior. They don't have politics. They don't have ambitions. All their belief is right now in their behavior. Whatever is right now to them, that's what they put all their belief, that's what they stake everything on. And in that sense, you mentioned the word Zen. In that sense, there's something Zen about these guys. And as a student of Zen, I'm surprised that I say it, but in that sense, yes.
It just occurred to me that I was kind of thinking about what's going on in society as these different eras of Western are going on, and how much that hidden wound thing and that kind of wrinkle on the side of John Wayne's eye remind me of my grandfather, and reminds me of just a lot of veterans that I knew from World War II that had that same thing, where they were family men and they were taking care of business and everything, but they were also, they had an alcohol problem, or they had, nightmares about Okinawa, or, their kids getting nuked or something, that was kind of a reflection in a way of a generation of men and what they were feeling too, that violence was always kind of something that they were trying to guard their their domestic life from, but it was always kind of there on the periphery of their memory. And then talking about, you know, the Man with No Name, and also James Bond, the the Vietnam attitude comes to mind to me in a way, that there's a a denial of feeling. There is a psychopathy there. You know, that's kind of what the military was demanding from these guys at that time, was we don't want you to feel at all, or, you know, whereas before it was like there's this icon of this guy fighting a black and white battle, and being righteous, and standing up for righteousness, and a morality, making it a morality play. Those later spaghetti westerns, there is no morality play. Even in the good, the bad, and the ugly, like, you can't really say the Man with No Name is good at all. He doesn't do anything that's beneficial for anybody except himself. Even when he saves what's the ugly guy from getting hung, right? It's for him. Yeah, that just kind of occurred to me, that there is this weird kind of confluence and parallel between the military and westerns, to me, that I can't deny, you know, and in a sense, I mean, it sounds weird, but I do think that in a way westerns are a kind of military propaganda, in a way, you know, like solving things with violence type deal, and that whole thing, you know, and yeah.
Well, especially when you get the cavalry involved. I mean, John Ford's famous cavalry trilogy of Fort Apache, and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and what is the last one? Rio Lobo. It's not Rio Lobo, it's Rio something else. Rio Grande. Rio Grande, that's what it is. Fort Apache and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Rio Grande. And then 1948, 1949, and 1950. Really practically deified the military.
Yeah. Well, you could throw the Alamo in there too, I guess.
Which one?
The Alamo.
Oh yeah, the Alamo.
Yeah.
All the different versions of the Alamo. If that's a mini film festival. The Disney Alamo with Davy Crockett.
Yeah.
Where against all historical stuff, Davy Crockett didn't die in the battle. He died the day after, firing squad. And then the John Wayne Alamo. All of them have good things in it. All of them do some stuff really well. And then the Alamo that Ron Howard directed. Did you see that?
Oh, I totally forgot about that. I might have seen it and just totally blanked it out.
It's an interesting picture in that it's the most accurate of the most historically accurate of the three. And while it does make a hero of Davy Crockett, he kind of doesn't want to be one. And he's killed the next day. He's bayoneted the next day because he is a catch. He's quite famous. But he won't give in. He won't do what they want him to do, and they kill him. And he plays it like they're not really killing me. Davy Crockett's killing me because I've always got to beat Davy Crockett. And it's an interesting picture that way. Also interesting to me, talking about these cavalry and Alamo movies. There's a good Bud Bodicher, Randall Scott one called The Man from Alamo. That's an interesting one to look up and see. But you know, the song that Buddy Ebsen sings in the Disney Alamo, Davy Crockett really wrote that.
Really?
He really wrote that poem. Huh. Uh, I think that's pretty funny, but he did. Goodbye to ye all, in the land of the stranger, I rise or I fall. But you can't think of the hodgepodge, crazy quilt, paradoxical, contradictory mass of works and impulses that we call American culture. The Western is, you can't think of it without thinking of the Western. The Western is somewhere at the heart of it.
Yeah. What's the best Western TV show?
Oh boy. Part of me wants to say Maverick.
Yeah.
Because it goes against type completely.
Yeah.
And does it real well. And has lines like if the good Lord thought highly of money, he would have given it to a better class of people. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But as a real Western, Gunsmoke has a lot of qualities and it had a lot of good writing. What other? Of course, there's Wagon Train that Clint Eastwood came out of. He was the actor in that. But after that, you got to go all the way to Deadwood.
Yeah.
Deadwood has a flavor of the West, and the people in it, they're all based on people. I've been in Deadwood before the casinos got there and everything. And, Wild Bill Hickok, David Carradine was terrific as Wild Bill Hickok in that. Was kind of wasted away. Calamity Jane. You can't exaggerate Calamity Jane. Calamity Jane was really something. And Bullock, the young sheriff, played by Timothy Oliphant, and his Jewish friend who became mayor for about 12 years, actually, in Deadwood. He was a real thing. And they do the character the way that character comes across in history. Now, here's an aside. That character, the Bullock, the opening scene in Deadwood where they want to hang this guy and he backs off the mob. Bullock was 19 when he did that. 19 or 20. He was still quite young, 20, 21 when he went to Deadwood. And Bullock stayed in the area. He had a ranch. And he was riding his ranch when he saw three riders coming toward him. Two had their hands tied. They were prisoners of the deputy sheriff that was bringing them in, and the deputy sheriff was young Theodore Roosevelt. And Bullock and Theodore Roosevelt became friends. And in fact, in later years, Theodore Roosevelt would send his sons to Bullock's ranch to toughen them up. Bullock had a hotel in Deadwood by then. He did pretty well. And Bullock was the one who first gave Theodore Roosevelt the idea of preserving some of the wilderness in vast national parks. And Theodore Roosevelt mentioned him in his second or third State of the Union in terms of the national parks. So you look at American history, especially west of the Hudson River, and you'll eventually get yourself into a Western. Also, the only, it's classic in Westerns that the Indians surround the found a fixed position where they're going to get shot at by people who have time to aim at them.
Yeah.
The only wagon train massacre that happened was when the Mormons were afraid a Christian wagon train coming through would settle.
Right.
And I forget where it was. It's kind of, and they massacred them. That was the only wagon train massacre ever.
Wasn't there a wagon train massacre against the Mormons too, though? Not by Indians, but
yes, there was.
Yeah.
So I take it back. It wasn't the only.
Yeah.
But Mormons had the wagon train massacre trouble.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of some of those late '60s Western TV shows, like the type that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of looks at.
Yes.
You know, like those were really good, and they weren't rerun when I was a kid. Like the reruns of Westerns was Bonanza, The Rifleman, but for a little while they did play Big Valley, which was a good one. Anything with Barbara Stanwyck is good,
right,
but
she did almost all her own stuff.
But those late '60s, early '70s TV westerns were actually really good. I had to look really hard to find some of them, but they're kind of forgotten about, and that was kind of a cool thing about that movie that he put some attention on those.
Can you remember some titles?
You know, I can't. There's a specific one that he's using in that movie, and I can't remember the name of it, but
I know one late '60s Western that I don't know if it even had a full season, but it was really good. It's called The Outcasts.
Huh.
It's with Don Murray and an African American actor whose name I forget, and Gloria Foster starred in one of them called Take Your Lover in the Ring. And it was one of the first times there was a black drama on TV that was really a black drama. And I have never seen it again, but have never forgotten it.
Yeah.
Late '60s, '68, '69, and it was called The Outcasts, and it is, as you say, a very different kind of Western.
Yeah.
And while we're on that subject in Westerns, Sidney Poitier in the early 70s, directed Buck and the Preacher with himself and Harry Belafonte and Ruby Dee, which is, to me, the most honest movie, certainly up to that time, about African Americans and just their attitudes and the attitudes toward them, where you have it's just an honest movie.
Buck and the Preacher?
Buck and the Preacher. Yeah.
Huh, I never heard of it. I'll have to look that up. It sounds good.
Look it up. It's a good film. Very underrated. And when they're talking about where's this hate come from, Louis D says it's like it just comes up out of the ground. You know, it becomes this thing they have a great deal of trouble understanding. Why this hate? But it actually deals with it, and I don't know another American film before that does.
Yeah. Well, before we go, I wanted to mention, and this is probably going to be laughed at by some people, but in the last like 10 years, I've come to really respect Michael Landon a lot, like just as a person and just his life history. If you look at it, it's pretty remarkable. But there was a season of Little House on the Prairie where they moved into the city, and it was one of the most honest depictions of a Western city that I had ever seen before. Him trying to keep his family out of trouble and people trying to exploit them, and it was kind of like was kind of like a Deadwood '70s version in a way. Of course, he turned it into this kind of like Christian morality play. But I don't know. I just thought I'd mention that. That was.
Well, Jasmine has taught me to have a lot of respect for the Little House on the Prairie novel.
It is a good show. It is.
And the novels that it comes from are very down to earth, realistic, convey the times very well. They are, to put it mildly, they are not existential.
No.
They do not speak to a modern sensibility.
No.
But that doesn't mean they're not good.
It was what you were supposed to watch with your grandparents on Sunday night. If you weren't watching the Waltons, yeah. But I do have to say that the best depiction of drug addiction I ever saw on TV was in Little House on the Prairie, and when he has to make his son quit heroin cold turkey, and it's just that's a gut wrenching episode of Little House on the Prairie. So we ended this by talking about Little House on the Prairie.
Well, I'm proud of us. Not many people would have the guts.
All right. Let's see here.